You may not realize this, but Game Dev Tycoon is pretty old now. It was my first step into PC gaming when I was about 15. I'm 25 now. The game was originally released on the Windows Store in 2012. Also, side note, who buys games on the Windows Store? Anyway, that's not my point. I'm still waiting on the sequel Greenheart Games, though I guess maybe you're still working on researching that feature, which is why today I'm taking up the task of making it myself. I modded Game Dev Tycoon to add a bunch of features I probably won't need or even understand, and I will be setting out with the goal of creating the ultimate Game Dev Tycoon sequel. At the end of the day, I'm helping them. Naturally, this starts out by creating a sequel to the original developer, so I would like to introduce you to Greenheart Games 2. Now, this next part might upset some people. I know I said I was going to help the developers, and this isn't easy to say. It really isn't, but this is a business. And I mean, how can I know they won't finish the game before me? It just had to be done. I don't do well with competition, so I put them out of business. I made Tavern Keeper before they could. This is a ruthless business move. I know. Do you think I wanted to do this? They didn't give me a choice. But what's done is done. Let's just let sleeping dogs lie. Which just so happened to be the title of my next game. With these first two games out of the way, we had set the groundwork of a successful game dev company, a steady income, a rapidly expanding fan base, and an ever-growing passion to make great games. I was continuously offered the opportunity to create DLC to capitalize on our game's potential success and focus on the money. But our focus shouldn't be money. It should be making games that people love and will continue to play for decades on decades, at least for now. See, there's this silly little term in the business world called goodwill. Goodwill is sort of like a currency. You earn goodwill by respecting customers, building trust, and creating great products on the backs of your extremely overworked employees. Then, only once you've built up enough goodwill can you use that goodwill to squeeze every ounce of financial stability out of an entire generation of gamers. Or just cover up a few scandals, maybe release an unfinished product or two. In order to aid our ability to build goodwill, I decided to create a game with the specific goal of painting me, CEO and lead developer of Greenheart Games 2, in a positive light. A psychological operation of sorts that would let the people that play it know that I was relatable, that I cared about them, and most of all that I was trustworthy and they should give me their hard-earned money. It was a hit, and I think it played a big part in the success of our following game, and biggest success to this point, Michael Jordan's Retirement 2, a game where you play as Michael Jordan in a hypothetical situation where he retired a second time and became an ice hockey superstar. This was the first of our games to reach over $1 million in profit, hopefully the first of many. At this point, I was more cocaine than man. The parties were non-stop. I mean, it was just me as the only employee of the company and I had no friends to invite, but partying alone is cheaper anyway. We were immensely successful and it was only the beginning of our second year as a company. It was time to expand. I bought a new office space and did some research online on how to be a good boss. I hired 2 new employees on the cheap as I didn't want to bankrupt the company before we could complete what we set out to do. With our team of 2 overworked henchmen and 1 incredibly handsome CEO, there was nothing that could stop us. We started work on our first engine as soon as everybody settled in, and thus Unity 2 was born. With this new engine, we were able to up our game completely, taking on deals with publishers to create larger projects that we otherwise couldn't afford with our small but loyal fan base. We were creating hits back to back, Backrooms Jogger, Rap God, and while preparing to work on our next title, we were presented with our first major opportunity to make a splash on the business side of things. One of our competitors, Eagle Software, declared bankruptcy. For the price of $500,000, I could buy the company and pay off the debt, and so I did. This would provide a new source of income, and it wouldn't even cost any goodwill in the eyes of the general populace. After all, it wasn't my fault they went out of business. People just weren't ready for games like Street Batman Blast or Subterranean Pokemon Trilogy. I would put them back on course, making the games that really set them apart. apart from other companies. Games like Royal Goth Anarchy. Shortly after the acquisition, we actually started working on our next engine, one that would allow us to kick it up yet another notch and enter the world of 3D. I've always said that graphics were what held Game Dev Tycoon back in the first place. I mean, 2D? Not even Disney deals with that crap anymore. It's the future, baby. Now it's all about realistic graphics, NFT integration, and amiibos. I'm getting ahead of myself though. Our first official 3D game was Naruto, a game that really makes you feel like Naruto. Unfortunately, none of us have actually read Naruto or watched it, so we don't really know what that feeling would be, but we assume it's like playing the game. After all, the game was a resounding success, as has come to be expected from Greenheart Games too. Our first attempt at self-publishing a medium game came in the form of a casual dress-up game on the Game Link, Dress My Dad. This was going to be a huge risk, as we had about 30,000 less fans than is recommended to self-publish games of this size. I like to live on the edge though. One thing that is interesting that I noticed around the release of Dress My Dad is that Eagle Software was ranked 3rd in the list of competitors. The company that I purchased that was previously going out of business was now a larger company than my own. This would be great insurance if I ever did find myself in dire straits in need of a cash injection. Of course, it would never come down to that, but it's always good to know my riskier decisions aren't likely to cost my company, they'll cost another company. Speaking of risk, my next move was not only to create another self-published medium-sized game, but to take on none other than Nintendo, and on their own device no less. I cleverly repackaged the Pokemon series under the name Pouch Beasts, and they were left none the wiser. Unfortunately, that can't necessarily be said for the consumers who immediately recognized that all of the Pouch Beasts in the game were just color swaps of Pokemon. We avoided the lawsuit, but lost in the court of public opinion. A small setback. As small of a setback as it was though, there was still a bit of fear. We can stand to break even or even lose money on a game every now and then, but losing fans was something else. I mean, you remember my whole goodwill speech. This is going directly against that. Acting quickly to try and garner some support, we started working on another God RPG. It wasn't a sequel or anything like that because we still haven't researched that feature, but it's as close as we can get right now. Bacchus Drink Battle was a smash hit, becoming the highest rated game to this point. With new heights being reached every day, it was time to expand, and so we did. 2 new minimum wage employees joined the crew, and we were finally starting to feel like a full team with these additions. But of course, we weren't even close to done yet. While the team took time to adapt to each other and establish a cohesive workflow, we took on some smaller contracts, nothing crazy, no new games, just something to keep the research points and money flowing. With everybody settled in, we got right to work, creating a new engine and a few new titles that performed well enough, but didn't really blow anyone's mind. The next big milestone wouldn't happen until after we researched sequels. Now, at this point, I was a bit worried we may be fading from the hearts and minds of our fans, at least as the beacon of morality we once were. We were now seen as just another game company. But we're more than that. We're your friends, your family. In fact, we're more than that. Better than your family. Get rid of your family, replace them with us, we'll never stop loving you. So we made a sequel to Dunc. Everybody loved it. Dunc was a beloved game, and now it was a beloved franchise. Old fans were buying it for nostalgia, new fans were buying it for the hype. Everything came together in the perfect storm that led to us making our first 10 million. Now when I say that, I don't just mean our first time reaching $10 million. This game was the first to make $10 million in profits. Over 1 million copies sold. And in keeping with the momentum, we pushed out another new engine that would bring us one step further ahead of the competition. We also upgraded our office and started working on a sequel to Naruto. It was released to mixed reviews. Moving on, we sort of fell into a rhythm, creating games and engines as you do. Our next major release was our first 9.75, a nearly perfect game. It was a murder simulation game, the title of which was, it was Teddy B was the title. And just to be clear, because I haven't been touching on it a ton, we have been researching a lot of features. Obviously, these help with our current games and really all games moving forward, but most importantly, they're important for the eventual release of Game Dev Tycoon 2, which is still the end goal of this, in case you've forgotten. Anyway, the success of Teddy B was enough that we could now afford a brand new office. Look at it, we've even got a bigger vending machine now. We also used this opportunity to trick 2 computer science majors into working themselves to an early grave for next to no money, which meant now we really had a full team. Like, for real this time. Of course, while I was deep in negotiations, Teddy B was still killing the competition and making tons of money, so we ended up crossing the threshold of $100 million for the first time. And deciding that it had been a bit since our last sequel, I again decided it was time for another installation into the Dunc franchise. Same reasons as before, albeit a bit less urgent this time. Just a quick refresher on how great I am. And boy, how great I was. A perfect game, without exaggeration. Our first 10 out of 10 video game, and spoiler alert for the rest of the video, not that it matters, but our last 10 out of 10 as well. Riding this wave of recent success, I catapulted that positive energy into a brand new R&D lab and started researching the next generation of 3D graphics. At this point, we've established ourselves at the forefront of gaming as pioneers in every category. We use this research to make a brand new engine and use that brand new engine to try and recapture the magic of Dunc 3 with Dunc 4. Honestly, it did well enough, but I think Dunc 3 was still fresh in everyone's mind, so the result wasn't quite the same. It wasn't long after this that we started on the next and final generation of 3D graphics. By this point, as you may be able to tell, we were drawing very close to the end, the final stretch with very little left to accomplish our goals. After this point, it's basically all about collecting whatever features we can before starting work on the game itself. And just to be clear, there was no chance of me getting every feature unlocked, not with the mods at least. There were so many features, it was ridiculous. Now, at this point, you may or may not have noticed that game development has slowed down quite a bit, and a part of that is just me not wanting to speak about each and every game we developed, but another part of it is the somewhat obvious fact that as we develop larger games, they are taking longer to make. By now we're working on AAA titles, and those take a very, very long time. That said, we basically put out another 3 games, made a new engine, and put out Dunc 5. You know the drill here. It's an established franchise that's essentially just propaganda. I don't really even have to hide it anymore. I mean, who are you gonna tell? The FCC? I bought them a decade ago. Honestly, at this point, all of our games are hits. Even when they aren't really that good, they still make millions of dollars. At this point, we're mostly just making games as a means to stack up research points and keep the money flowing as we close in on the day of reckoning. So with that said, we complete Unity 9, the last of the Unity series, but not the last engine we'll make. We'll come back to that though. After the completion of Unity 9, I realized that I haven't done everything I could to make Game Dev Tycoon as profitable as possible. What if I create a console as well? Then sales of the game will boost sales of the console and make even more money. So I did that and worked on the Dunc box. I know, creative name. Here's where things hit a bit of a roadblock that I hadn't really considered. I don't have a single topic research that would make any sense to be used with Game Dev Tycoon 2. Not one. I mean, sure, I could call it a murder simulator and call it a day, but I wanted something just tangentially related. So I started researching, and I used up just about every research point I had until I eventually found sci-fi. And I know this isn't a perfect solution, but I was not even halfway through the topics list, and I'm sorry, but that was just not worth it. Again, just blame me for adding too many mods. With the development of the game rapidly approaching, I made a last-minute Hail Mary decision to give myself a bit of a financial boost before creating the final engine. I would cash in on the goodwill I gained in the beginning. If it flopped, it should still be recoverable, but if it did well, I'd have more than enough funds to cover development of the engine, the game, and marketing. And so, money now was made. It was exactly what it sounds like, a cash grab, complete with predatory DLC. In a just world, this is where I would have failed. I would have lost it all. My fans would have left me in the dust, and I would have had to start start from square one, but I didn't. The fans did exactly as I expected. They bought the game and the DLC without any hesitation and gave me the funding I needed. After some last-minute feature research, I began work on the GDT2 engine, the final engine I would need, and really the final engine anyone would need after what was to come. Development of Game Dev Tycoon 2 began just as soon as development of the engine was completed. This is what it's all built up to, the crescendo of an absolutely flawless 30 years of game development, where I definitely never went bankrupt and cut the footage not even once. The development of my magnum opus and the greatest game the industry would ever see. It was at this moment I realized as well that my console had 100% of the market share. I don't know why this happened, but it was surely a sign of great things to come. For Game Dev Tycoon 2, I added every feature I could, from realistic water physics to a branching storyline like no other RPG has ever seen. As my workers wore themselves thinner and thinner to complete the game, I continued to work them to the bone. Labor laws be damned, and perhaps most importantly, I put every dollar I reasonably could into marketing, ensuring that everyone on the planet knew of the game. If this game didn't do well, it would be over. And so, with bated breath, we waited. And people actually liked it? I mean, of course they liked it. Why wouldn't they like it? But even as confident as I was, I could never have foreseen this. Over 1 trillion copies were sold in the first week. I don't know what caused this or what mod broke for this to happen, but God, if this isn't a beautiful ending, I do not know what is. So if you see this, Greenheart Games, I hope you find some inspiration for when you do get around to making Game Dev Tycoon 2, as this is basically a guaranteed strategy to selling 36 trillion copies.